We do have our special budget presentation this evening, but I should have mentioned this. As a special meeting, we probably ought to begin with the Pledge of Allegiance and our moment of silence anyway. So why don't we do that? If all would please rise for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. If you all will just join us in a moment of silence that you can use for silent prayer, reflection, or to prepare for the meeting. Thank you all very much. Well, we are glad you have joined us. It is a requirement that by April 1st every year that the city manager and the school system bring council a balanced budget. And so that is our discussion for the evening. It is our primary focus for the meeting. And with that, I won't say anything more. I'll turn the floor over to Todd Meredith. Todd, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Mayor Horton, Vice Mayor Gillespie, and members of the City Council, it's my pleasure to present to you the fiscal year 2027 proposed budget. It is balanced, and fiscal year 2026, I can start by talking a little bit about it. I know that council had to make some tough decisions going into the current fiscal year, and when I started here in July of 2025, I will say the first few months, things were really tight. I have to say, over the last few months, 2 months or so, I'm seeing progress. We're seeing a little bit of growth. The city's financial position seems to have gotten just a little bit stronger over the last couple months. So overall, we're looking at an upward trend with the city's financial position with fiscal year 2026. So with that being said, I'd like to start talking about I'd like to inform you a little bit about the fiscal year 2027 budget, how it was created, the methodologies used to create the budget, and what's in the budget. So I'd like to start by talking about 4 core budget values that informed myself and staff and that we held near and dear to our hearts as we tried to, as we put together the FY27 budget. And those core values were effectiveness, efficiency, financial sustainability, and maintaining independent city status. Those were our core values, and we kept those in mind as we created the revenues, the expenditures, and as we reviewed everything that the city puts its money toward. Effectiveness, when we talk about effectiveness, we're talking about continuing to provide the high-quality services that the residents in Radford have become accustomed to. We want to provide the best service possible. And the FY27 budget, I believe, sets us in a position where we can continue to do that. Efficiency. So we want to provide the best service possible, but we also want to do it at the cheapest cost possible. Do it the best you can at the cheapest cost. We aim to provide those services at the lowest cost possible because we want to minimize the burden that we're placing on city residents. So we've tried to minimize that in the FY27 budget. Financial sustainability, that's a requirement. Every municipality has to be financially solvent, financially sustainable. So we're looking at maintaining healthy financial position of the city so that we can make sure that we can meet so that we can meet the needs of the community and the city's obligations. And of course, really, all of these really pour into that final core value of maintaining independent city status. We have to be operationally and financially in a position to provide for the needs of residents and to meet every obligation that the city faces. Methodologies. I really want to zero in on 2 methodologies that were used to create the FY27 budget. Those are zero-based budgeting and revenue projections that are grounded in data. We wanted to improve the accuracy of our revenue projections. So I'll start with zero-based budgeting. And just a little bit about what that is. A zero-based budget is created by zeroing out all the expenditure line items. You take everything and reset it to 0. And what we've asked of department heads is, okay, take your department budget, start at 0, look at everything. Look at every contract, look at every expenditure, Even if it's a recurring expenditure, take a look at it and make sure that it is needed. And if it's not, get rid of it. And you may have heard that. Another term to describe that is legacy spending. It's spending that can be in public budgets, private sector budgets. It's spending that's there, and no one really knows why, but it just continues on. It just lives on. So we've tried to identify those and get rid of them. And that's being efficient. That satisfies that value of efficiency. So we have found several items. I'd like to identify two or highlight those. And I'd really like to thank Katie Woodyard, our accounts payable clerk. She has worked very hard on this. And Mel has worked with her on this second bullet that we have. So those two staff members, using zero-based budgeting strategies, we have already identified by eliminating unnecessary phone lines, cell phones, DSL accounts. The city already, from what we've eliminated already, will save $31,000, $31,060 to be exact. That's already been achieved. We will save that over the next 12 months. In my discussions with them, we believe that number could climb as high as $60,000 next year. And when you think about that in terms of the city's real estate tax, that's almost half a cent on the real estate tax, savings from unnecessary spending. The third bullet there, it's a smaller number, but I put it in here to drive home the point that small numbers accumulate into larger numbers. So even finding small savings are significant. Katie, the same staff member, and I want to give her credit for this, she found in one of our accounts where we were being charged sales tax. We shouldn't have been. She brought it to this vendor's attention, and the city is going to receive $1,400 in a refund from paying sales tax that we shouldn't have been paying. That was caught by looking at these things. Going forward, it will save the city $545 annually. That may not sound like a large amount, but you multiply that time and time again, it compounds. It's a compounding gain. So the city and city staff are looking at large expenditures. We're looking at small expenditures. We haven't found everything, but every time we comb through this budget, through every iteration, the more we find, we keep sifting through it and getting rid of unnecessary costs. It will add up. It'll add up this year, it'll add up next year, and years to come. So as we continue to find those, we'll continue to report them to you, and we'll continue to do everything we can to mitigate the expenditure side of the ledger. When we look at the revenue side of the ledger for the city, it's really important to make sure that trend lines, when we make a projection on revenue, we really don't have much margin for error, especially given the city's current financial position. Missing a revenue projection by a large number without a reduction in expenditures, that can lead to a loss of fund balance. It could lead to tough cash flow issues throughout the fiscal year. So we really want to hit those as accurately as we can. The methodology we used on most of our revenues is a trend line. And those trend lines are based on 10 years of data, actuals typically, unless in some we trend values and then work backward to get the expected tax rate. But for the most part, it's trend lines of actuals. We have placed those within a 95% confidence interval using Excel. We didn't use any fancy software or anything like that. It's just Excel. We have come up with more accurate, dependable revenue projections. You're never going to hit them exact. But what using trend lines does is it reduces the margin of error. And it builds into the system as you go through every iteration or every year. If you hit it a little high, all those data points, the trend line will pull it back down. So you don't just continue to overshoot, it will correct. So you don't have these compounding errors that grow from $200,000 off to $500,000 off to and so forth. It will correct itself. I don't want to get too much into the statistics of it, but creating the trend line, the function that we used in Excel, it is an exponential trend line, and the only reason I bring that up, it is more accurate, more sensitive to recent changes in data. A linear trend line assumes symmetrical changes. It's a straight line. An exponential is more curved with the data. So it's much more sensitive. When you look at sales tax, when you see the increase and these variations at the end, it's going to be more sensitive to that. That's an advantage over using a linear trend line. So that's all I'll say about the difference between the two. But it is a more accurate way to make these projections. I will say with sales tax, what we put in the budget, our projection or our forecast is $1,844,038. We recently received a report from the state where the state put a projection on the city's sales tax after we had done this. And the state, their projection was $1,880,000, approximately, within a few $1,000s. So that tells me, one thing, our trend lines are probably pretty accurate using this data. We're only $35,000, $40,000 off the state projection in a $1.8 million account there. So that's added to my confidence that as long as we have good data, we can make good projections, and they can be more accurate. Just one more example, hotel motel room tax. We use the same method here. What you can see here is there's more rapid growth within the past few years. Using this method, that can get a little tough to make a projection. Once again, grounding it in the data lets us make a more confident projection of what next year will be. We're projecting $594,488 in the hotel and motel room tax. So we feel confident in our projections.
Before you go off this slide, this is a good time, I think, to talk about your confidence interval maybe. Why wouldn't you be up closer toward the 700,000 or down closer to the 465? What is giving you that specific target that you're heading now?
So what you're speaking to really gets into the art of
Right.
budgeting and making projections. So we have data points. And within a 95% confidence interval, using that as the standard for Excel, you'll have a high of 723,000 and a low of 465. So Excel is saying, for the most part, it's about 95% certain that the next data point, the next year's projection, will be between those numbers. So we took the middle ground. And the reason we did that, and once again, that's sort of the art of trying to figure out what your projection is going to be. So you have to, if we had another hotel or a large business coming in, we would probably start to increase and go up toward the $723,000 number. Or if we had a major business that was leaving town or leaving the city, we would start to go down toward that 465. So somewhere in that window, we'd make a projection. It really depends. You have to pay attention to what's actually happening in the city.
And I think that's incredibly important because, there's some folks who would say, well, let's just aim low on everything, like 465 or whatever that lowest number is, but that brings its own set of challenges. And then others that would say, hey, we could potentially have 600,000-700,000. Why don't we aim much higher and we don't have to have additional revenues or additional cuts? So I wanted to get to that because that's central to everything you've put together for this. I believe, with each of the areas of looking at our revenues so that you can best understand why we need whatever increases or cuts or things along that line. So I just wanted to get to that before we got too deep into the presentation, but thank you very much.
Yeah, and just to speak to that, the danger and the consequence, if we were to aim too high and we did that and we did that on enough revenue projections or missed it by enough, so the consequence is you overspend. And you'll spend your fund balance down because the revenue's not there to match the expenditures. If we go too low, the city would have to make very draconian cuts or go up on the tax rates. Somehow you have to make that balance. So,
right. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. The fiscal year 2027 budget. So overall, it's $79,179,807. You can see the general fund is $35.3 million of that, streets $3.2 million, transit $3.8 million, water, wastewater $7.3 million, electric $27.4 million, solid waste $1.7 million, and internal services $967,000. I'd like to make a point about two of these. Internal services, we may have some people that have questions about that. Internal services is not included in that total because internal services, that's like our garage, gas, things that we pay ourselves for. We operate the garage, but we still bill out departments. So each department pays, if there's a vehicle that has to be repaired, it goes to the garage. That department is billed by the garage for the amount. So it operates internally in that way. So we don't include that in the total. And the transit, and Melissa, not to put you on the spot, but transit, I want to make the point, the city, 3.8 million, roughly how much of that 3.8 is grant funded, estimate roughly?
The city's portion is at approximately $250,000. That includes capital and operating.
Yeah. So transit, it does have a $3.8 million budget there, but it's a couple $100,000 that the city funded portion. The rest is through grants. So I did want to draw that to everyone's attention. Budgeted transfers to reserves. So if we look at the general fund, the current budget, there is no growth in the fund balance there. There's no transfer to reserves. The general fund is just balanced. Water, wastewater, and I'm in the second column here. Water, wastewater, it will grow by $209,000 with the proposed budget. Electric by $865,000, and solid waste, should say solid waste, not waster, I apologize. Solid waste, $32,000. So it's a break-even budget. If I may, for a few moments, I would like to talk about columns 3 and 4, though. Columns 3 and 4 are what are recommended for these fund balances and where they should be. The general fund should be about 10% of its total budget. That would be $8.5 million. That's where it should be to be healthy. And that is actually part of Radford's financial policy. It is supposed to be at 10%. Water, wastewater should be at 1.8 or 25%. Now, that's not set by policy. That's just more good practice. And electric should be at 35%, $9.6 million. And the solid waste should be at about $439,000. Those are the balances we really want to aim for with each of these accounts. Now, that can't happen overnight, and we all know that. You can't get there overnight. But incremental increases, incremental momentum, this, even if it's gentle, persistent pressure and moving in that direction, just keeping the arrow trend in those directions, I think is a win for the city. So those are the goals. They can't happen overnight, but that's where we really need to be. So over the next several budget cycles, that's the goal. Please note that the general fund, that does include the city's portion, the funding for Radford City Public Schools. Just to drill down a little bit into the general fund. The general fund, when we look at it and break it up by how it's funded, where's the money coming from for the general? The $35 million, how are we getting there? And you can see I have a pie chart on the right. Most of it's general property taxes, other local taxes. The other local taxes are things like meals tax, sales tax, transient occupancy. General property is going to be your real estate, your personal property. Of course, we have state, federal funding. But I do want to draw everyone's attention to the slice that is in red, transfers. Transfers in this year's budget equates to $4.9 million to balance the general. The reason I want to draw everyone's attention to that's probably, well, it's not probably, it is larger than it needs to be. That transfer slice really needs to be smaller. As we move forward and we try to establish these fund balances, shrinking that slice needs to be a major goal for the city moving forward. There's a couple reasons for that. Those transfers are coming from enterprise funds. And the enterprise funds, as we know from the losing the foundry at the Commerce Park, when demand for those services goes down, it can really impact, it significantly impacts the general fund if it's dependent on those. So it makes it more difficult to balance when you have times of turbulence in your enterprise funds, or if you have a reduction, it can really impact the general fund. That slice, if I were to just kind of throw a percentage out there, it probably should look more like that purple slice next to it, the federal. You're always going to have some form of a transfer. That's always going to happen. But it shouldn't be, we really need to work toward it not being annual and it not being that large. That will stabilize the general fund. And if we drill down further into that slice, that red slice, the transfers, so this is where those are coming from. 78% of that transfer is from the electric department, $3.7 million in FY27. Water, wastewater, the transfer is $898,000, and solid waste is $138,000. So those transfers are being made this year to balance the general. 78%, the electric has, for years, and I certainly understand, for years the electric has really carried that. I would say if we had pie charts going back years, it's probably going to look very similar. But just wanted to drill down into that and show everyone where those transfers were coming from. And, I can take a second and pause. Does anyone have any questions or comments at this point?
I have a quick question.
Sure.
So when we're looking at transfers from water, wastewater, solid waste, that going into the general fund, what concerns me is, are we not funding these particular categories for updates and things that we're needing? Because we know we have older infrastructure. So are we taking that money and needing it for the general fund opposed to, utilizing it within that department for needs?
Yes, that is true. And that's the other negative side to having that large slice of transfer. Each enterprise fund, water, wastewater, electric, all of them require investment in infrastructure. And when we make those transfers out, it leaves minimal to no money to invest in that. Things like vehicles, trucks, equipment, repairing electric infrastructure, the lines, water lines that we may not see them, they're underground, but water lines that are aging, sewer lines that are aging, the water treatment plant, and I'm going to drill down into some of that in a couple slides, but that is absolutely what happens when we transfer that out. It doesn't leave money to invest in the infrastructure of each of those enterprise funds.
None at all.
It does. Right now, we don't have any. The fiscal year 26 budget had no capital projects budgeted in there, so nothing this year. In the upcoming budget, we do have a $500,000 project in the electric to replace some electric poles that have been damaged by woodpeckers. I know that sounds kind of weird, but it can cause very expensive damage, and they are nearing a point where it's a have to, not a want to. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think that I have to, not a want to, across several different areas, that as we move forward, we are going to have to be pretty selective and pretty targeted in a lot of our infrastructure costs. And I think we did a good job last year with some of the CBDG funds. We're able to, I think, down on Stockton Street and looking at ways for that, because I agree. I mean, I think that we have several pressing infrastructure needs that it's not if, it's when. And, it is, being so reliant on those transfers is a little worrisome.
Yeah, agreed. And, just to drill into that a little bit further, when we look at our water plant, certainly I've had many conversations with Wade, but the city has 5 steel tanks, 4 glass tanks. I have that number correct. Those steel tanks are approximately 75 years old. They're old. It's my understanding that the city, and through conversations with Wade, it's my understanding the city has not, there has been no preventative maintenance on those for 25 years. Preventative maintenance on water storage tanks, that includes like caulking, cleaning, painting if needed, getting them inspected to see are there any points of failure or potential points of failure. An annual program, or at least semi-annual, getting them on a schedule for preventative maintenance. Caulking is very important. I've learned that from Wade. Caulking is very important for these storage tanks. And, the danger is, or the consequence is, failing to do that, if we have a water tank that maybe we could get 20 more years out of, but because we don't have the capital money to invest in preventative maintenance, maybe it lasts 5 years or 7 years instead of 20. So that's the concern with not putting the money into capital, is your assets, they can reach the end of their useful life much quicker.
One quick question. A lot of things seem to be kind of coming to a head as far as these upcoming costs at the same time. Do we have kind of an updated capital project of priority list that we could kind of go through in a reasonable time? We know we can't tackle it all this year, but maybe the next 5-10 years. Have we been able to look at that, update that, kind of prioritize where the most emergent situations are?
So staff, we can certainly get together with staff and start to prioritize. No one knows our systems better than our department directors. It would also assist our department directors. In some cases, we have capital improvement plans. Some places we need capital improvement plans. I have made an application for grant funding to get a capital improvement plan on the water system. I'm still waiting to hear back. I'm very optimistic that we may get it. That would be $60,000 to get a capital improvement plan there. I think once we get the capital improvement plan, we'll have to look through it, because when we get it, it's going to put us on a schedule, and it's going to tell us, in fiscal year 28, here are the items that must be attended to or highly recommended fiscal year 29, and so forth. But I think in areas where we don't have a capital improvement plan, certainly we can try to obtain grant funding to get those. But I also trust, our department directors and what they have to say. I think they have a few projects in mind that truly are a top priority.
Well, even with some of the grants, they expect some participation financially from us. So am I reading this correctly, saying that this year we are transferring all of these monies out of these accounts into the general fund? We're still at the situation where we're needing to do that?
We're not transferring all the money. The 3 proprietary accounts are going to grow a little. There's some being left there, which is good. So that gets a little progress toward the capital. We are still transferring a tremendous amount out. And the general, as I said earlier, it's really balanced from those transfers. But this year in the proposed budget, those fund balances would start to regain some of their strength back.
Yep, and I know it's not going to happen overnight, but I was just curious that, since we're identifying this as a serious concern, sooner rather than later, and just in case of the event, one of those things you've mentioned happens and we're not prepared.
Absolutely. Just one more point to drive it home with water. The water treatment plant, from my understanding, it has not had any renovation or any significant renovation for about 30 years. And the life cycle of a water treatment plant is 30 to 40 years. So I know Wade has managed it very well and done an excellent job in getting every bit of life he can get out of it, but just keep that in mind. Some of the infrastructure is reaching a point where it's expected to start to age out. So.
I had one question, Todd.
Yes.
So I completely agree. Our department heads definitely know the systems better than we do, for sure. And I know you said that there had not been really any plan or maintenance for I just lost my train of thought. Preventative maintenance. Caulking, you said, was one thing that was really important. Are we working toward kind of implementing some small checks here and there, monthly checks, quarterly checks, to make sure that we're checking to make sure that we don't have some major emergency happen?
What that looks like, typically you're going to have an outside agency. They'll be on a maintenance schedule. With, I know there are certain companies, I don't want to name them, but there are companies that specialize in this. We don't have the equipment to, often they'll put like a remote in the tank. And
Okay,
it kind of
so
goes
it's not an
around the
internal
tank.
thing.
It's not internal. Now, I'm certain Wade, Wade, I'm certain you put eyes on the infrastructure, and to the best of your ability, you're watching it. But a lot of the
Doing
unknown
everything we
is.
can internally to make sure we're checking everything.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
One more quick question. Back on where we were talking about, let me turn my pages here. The fiscal year 2027 budget was the headline on that sheet. When we were talking about transit, we have the $3,800,000 listed as an expense, but our actual expense is $250,000. Is the grant money coming in another slide under revenue?
I don't have that broken out. I just wanted to make a point that it's only a couple $100,000 that the city funds. The rest of it is grant.
Well, it's university and federal money.
Yes,
Comes in.
yes.
Yeah.
But I'm saying there's a total at the bottom of 79 million, which includes the 3,894,000, but our actual expense is 250.
I think I understand the question. So the reason that number is in there is because we receive the money, so whether it's coming from Radford University or the federal government, it comes into the city's coffers. So we have to show it as revenue.
Okay.
And then we expend it into the transit program, so it goes out as expenditure. So it looks like the entire 3.8 is locally funded and coming internally. It's not. We just receive that money, so we
Okay.
show it on both sides of the ledger.
Okay, so we're just including that as revenue?
Yes.
And then it's coming out, okay.
But totally dedicated revenue that
Right.
can't be used
Right,
anywhere
no,
else.
right, gotcha. All right, thank you.
I'd like to take a few minutes to talk about pilot, that's payment in lieu of taxes, and our transfers from our enterprise accounts over to the general. I hope everyone can see this. I was having trouble formatting it, but payment in lieu of taxes, I'd like to take a second to identify that and talk about what it is. Pilot, this payment is made from these enterprise funds to the general fund. The reason that happens, and that is normal, it is healthy, and it should happen. Payment in lieu of taxes from the electric department and from the water department and solid waste, that is what the city's general fund would collect in personal property taxes, machinery and tools taxes, any of the taxes that if they were operating as a private business, the general fund would receive in revenue through those real estate and personal and other local taxes. So those funds transfer that money to the general as if they were a business. It stays internal to the city, but they do make that transfer. And as I said, that's healthy. That's not an issue that we see in the budget. The transfers themselves, that was that red slice that we looked at a couple slides ago. That's the one we really want to work on, making sure that if we can reduce the size of that, then those enterprise funds can start to really fund themselves a lot better, and we can build up the fund balances to stay ahead of capital needs and so forth. With regards to the pilot calculation, you may be wondering, so the first chart on the left is fiscal year 26. The middle chart is fiscal year 27, and then it's the increase in the final chart. There's quite a significant increase in pilot, and I wanted to talk a little bit about that and why that may be. If anyone looks at that and is like, well, why did that go up so much in such a short period? Well, the reason it went up so much, there hasn't been an adjustment to the pilot calculation since 2019. So, and pilot was reduced in 2024, which brought it down even lower. For fiscal year 2027, Trish and our finance department, they have restored it to its proper calculation. So the calculation you see for fiscal year 2027, it's accurate. That is what they would be paying were they a private industry. So the number is accurate this year. So I just wanted to draw everyone's attention to that. There is a note here, 37 cents on the tax rate. That's to get rid of the transfer. Just wanted to kind of put that in perspective. And, like I said, you can't get there overnight, but it just helps, I think, putting it in perspective and helping us all understand the size of the transfers that are being made and what's going on with them. Fiscal year 27, that number grows. It grows from 37 cents to 40 cents. So it's something we want to keep our eye on, and it's certainly something we want to, as we move forward, we want to be tending to.
I have a question for you. I think most localities have a water and a solid waste fund. Our electric's a little bit of a unique situation, so it's essentially a tax. So do you have any idea what that would, if we were to look at that, what would that equate to on our tax rate for revenue? Because I think that if you look at it that way, what would that jump up? Do you have any idea of how many cents that would be?
So like the payment in lieu of taxes, what does that equate to in real estate tax?
Yes.
I don't have that number with me tonight, but I will get it for you.
Okay, awesome.
Yes.
Thank you.
Good question. Anything else? All right. General fund expenditures by function. When we look at it by function, you can see public safety, education. That's where the city of Radford puts most of its money. We put it in public safety and education. That's fairly normal. You're going to see that in most municipalities. And I think if you were to poll most people, that's probably where they want to see most of their funding go. So, you know, there's nothing in this slide other than I wanted to draw everyone's attention that, yes, we are putting money into those two areas. Of course, we are funding other functions, judicial administration, public works, health, human services, parks and recreation, and community development. We do have those, but just wanted to shed a little light on this. And
Could you give us some examples of the community development?
community development, those community development are things like economic development. They can be things, and I actually have a list here.
Well, and I think I saw it on the next slide. I was just, main question I was
Yeah,
asking
planning.
is if that's not infrastructure, is it?
No.
Okay,
no.
okay, that was, yeah.
You're looking at things like planning, tourism, community development, zoning, economic development, et cetera. You're looking at those types of functions.
Yeah, thank you.
But it is important because growing our way out of this is another part of the puzzle. We have to grow Radford. We need to attract businesses. We need to, I know Kim's worked hard on the West Commerce Park project. When that's finished, it will attract a large industry or business. That's going to be a game changer for Radford. Attracting other businesses, that's a major component. Not just getting efficient with what you're spending and, you know, working the revenue and getting good at what we're doing, but Radford has to grow, and that's a large part of that.
People frequently ask about some of the bigger numbers up there and why we can't make adjustments to some things. Things like judicial administration, health and human services, some of those elements, many of those are out of our control, correct? That they come to us as a number that someone else has generated and said, this is a must spend, that it's not something that is even much of a negotiation. Is that accurate?
That's correct. Yes, you're looking at things, constitutional officers, the services they provide, things that are mandated expenditures. Those are large portions of those.
And I want to say that health and human services number, just in the time you've served, went from about $1 million to $4 million. Is that
Right.
accurate?
It is, and that's something that, you know, we don't control. It just depends on how many at-risk youth we get in our community and the services we have to provide for them. I mean,
Yeah.
we kind of will, it's hard to even budget for that because you really simply don't know. You could get a couple large families, and I can tell you every month it varies, but it doesn't take but, you know, one or two larger scenarios to really have that number
Yep.
escalate quickly.
And I just bring that up because when we talk 35 million, or when you get to the overall budget of 79 million, that seems like such a big number that $4 or $5 million you could just find. And that's the challenge when you start breaking it down. Out of the 35 million, there's only a handful of things that you could even trim if you wanted to, and you were really making an effort to. And that's important for folks to understand, because we're not over budgeting in areas, specifically when they tell us from outside sources, this has to be at this level.
That's correct. Yes.
Can you give some examples of the non-departmental category there?
Yes. Non-departmental, looking at transfers, debt service, those types of things. Non-departmental.
So interest payments, just miscellaneous expenses. Yeah.
Sort of, yes. All right. If we look at it, if we kind of slice it another way, and we look at it by object, we have personnel, contractual services, internal services, material supplies, capital outlays, those are capital projects, transfers, debt service, that's that other that we were just talking about. The largest expenditure we have is personnel, and I know that looks large. That's typical. Personnel is typically going to be one of your largest expenditures that you're going to have. That's in any municipality. The thing I would like to, you know, and it sort of, it builds on what we were talking about earlier, the capital outlay. That bar should be larger. We should be investing more in capital, and right now, it's one of our smallest. So I wanted to draw everyone's attention to that. Our total capital outlay is $500,000, and most of that is in one project in the electric department. There's about $70,000 left for capital. So you know, as we were talking earlier about water, wastewater, sewer lines, water lines, there's no budget for those at this point. There's no recommended budget for them, but we need to be thinking about them, and they need to be on our radar, and we need to be developing a plan of attack to get those things addressed.
Can you talk a little more about the personnel line? Because that's been a subject for a lot of conversation. I know we're down about 28 to 30 positions in the budget, equaling about $1 million or so dollars. Can you talk a little bit about how that's developed and what some of the challenges are when we start looking at that number if we were to make adjustments to it?
Yes. So the FY27 budget, we've carried forward 25 frozen positions, so we're not going to fill those. We are adding, we have went as high as 34 employees that we have pulled back this year. Some of those we have to add back in. Some we have to add back in due to state funding and requirements to make sure that we have employees working towards state-funded projects. We have a couple positions we budgeted for in fiscal year 27. One police officer. We're budgeting in the electric department for a customer service tech for line location, so that Tim's department isn't pulling line techs or ground techs to go find power lines, which frees them up for electric work on the lines. Tree cutting's one where I know that's been an issue and a concern. Limited staff there. We've pulled back. I believe there are 4 line techs left in the department. We have 2 line tech 1s, 2 line tech 2s. Do I have that number correct?
Basically 4 top line.
Yep.
2 of those are working for me.
Yep. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, we've hired in a few new people as ground techs and brought them in, but it takes a while to build their capacity up. But you know, cutting trees has been a challenge. And one thing Tim and I have talked about next year, you know, with reduced staffing, we still have to get these things accomplished. If we can get them done in-house, we're gonna do our best. But we may have to hire a few contractors to come in and help with that work. But we can't. Yes, go ahead.
One quick question, just while we were on the personnel, and I know at one time I had talked to you that it was tracking for this fiscal year from the hiring freeze about a $2 million savings in the budget. Are we still seeing those kind of numbers? And what would it take for us to make up for that had we not had that? I mean, if we're, as far as, you know, on real estate or whatever, it'd be pretty significant, wouldn't it?
Yes. So at 30, if we're over 30 to 34 employees, we're looking at about $2 to $2.5 million savings in the budget. At 25, I think a safe estimate, I don't have it in front of me, probably $1.5 million to $2 million with 25 employees. So what that would look like to fund that back, you know, we went through the budget, you know, just to put it in terms of real estate, to balance things back out, you get about $118,000 per penny. So it would take quite a few pennies to get that back in the budget. And I will, speaking to personnel, the city, and we can learn to operate at these levels. We may have to make a few adjustments, but I'm going to talk in a little bit later in the presentation. The city can learn, and we can adapt and learn to operate at reduced levels. I think had the city not made the cuts it made in fiscal year 26, the fact of the matter is the city wouldn't have made it financially. We had to make those cuts. Otherwise, you could run out of money before the end of the year. But I know that we planned for those as well. We'd planned to pull back, and we had put that on the revenue side of the ledger in fiscal year 26. In fiscal year 27, it's showing up on the expenditure and reduced personnel costs. And I'll talk a little bit more about staffing levels and our plan to move forward with that. Yeah.
Can you talk about other charges just a little bit too, since that's our second largest number up there?
Yeah, other charges, so I apologize. I just want to make sure I get everything right. Other charges, we're looking at utilities, postage, telecommunications, internet cable, et cetera. Those types of things, lease and rent of equipment, DSS service, some of those things that we're cutting out of the budget, Criminal Justice Academy, conferences, education, dues and memberships, insurance, surety bonds.
So a lot, the reason I bring that up is, again, that's another big number where folks say, is there 2 million, 3 million that could be cut out of that? And you feel like we're about as lean as we can be in those areas, that we've looked and found efficiencies, but we have to have some of those things to be able to operate.
You have to have them, and we have found some. You know, the example with the cell phones, that's part of those charges. Now, are we going to find, $1 million there? Probably not, at least not the first year or two. But as we continue to comb through it, and every iteration when we go through that, we find unnecessary spending, we're going to get rid of it. So we're going to get as lean as we can get, but to answer your question, a lot of those, you have to have internet, you have to have phones, you have to have some of these things. I think the key is to make sure we're not spending money in areas where it's not needed, which, like the unused phones, or, make sure we're not overpaying. Try to get as much efficiency as we can get there.
Thank you.
The budget drivers for the fiscal year 2027 budget, these are things that really had an impact on balancing the budget for the next fiscal year. This budget does assume it's balanced with a 5-cent increase to real estate. That would go from 82 cent to 87 cent. The water rate by $1 per 1,000 gallons. What that looks like on a minimum charge, our minimum bill is 4,000 gallons. That would go from $24.32 to $28.32. The electric rate would increase by 5%. And I will say the electric rate, our consultant GDS has worked with us they have done the analysis. The city, there's not much room to move there. In order to keep the electric department solvent and to be able to make that transfer to the general, 5% is about what it's going to need. We do preserve 25 frozen positions. And as I said, preserving those frozen positions, if we didn't keep those frozen and we filled them, we're looking at trying to make up well over $1 million, maybe approaching $2 million. Loss of approximately $1.3 million in the electric revenue due to Radford University switching to their own cogen power source. And the loss of approximately $200,000 due to Pulaski County not honoring the revenue sharing agreement. We did not budget for those. Those had to be pulled out of next year's budget. So that was a hit. And we have to make that up somewhere. Preserving the frozen positions and the 5% in the electric, that's how we make up some of those losses.
Can we talk about that electric a little bit? Because I know that's been a source of a lot of questions that folks have had, knowing that this is coming for about 4 years. The $1.3 million, if I'm correct, is the profit that we would make or the revenue above expense that the city would make on the electric that Radford University has been buying that will not be sold to them anymore once cogen comes online. And we have accounted for the additional electric purchase that would not take place as part of that as well, because I think the whole thing was around $4 or $4.5 million. Was that about right, Tim? I mean,
Yeah, 1.3 is probably based on a year's profit.
right.
I can probably agree that trying to forecast when they're coming online is going to be a challenge.
Right. So that's, and what we're doing is being conservative, essentially, by pulling that out and saying that it could be a number that won't be as large as that, which would be a bonus for us with this budget. And again, money that could be put aside or toward capital improvements. But also, I think there's still parts of that agreement that haven't been concluded yet. So we don't know what all that revenue picture looks like, correct? And I just wanted to bring that up because that's a giant question mark right now, and we haven't really gotten all the answers to be able to figure that out to know. It's a challenge for us without a doubt, especially since we've transferred so much from the electric department historically. But that's a number we need to continue to talk about so that folks can understand that. I think you've made the right choice by maximizing what we think that loss will be, and then we'll see, hopefully we come in less than that, and then that provides additional support for the budget for unexpected expenses and hopefully reserves or capital projects or whatever that looks like. And then can we talk a little bit more about the electric rate increase, or are you going to get to that a little bit later?
I'm going to get to that. Yes.
That's fine.
Yep.
Let me ask you a quick question. How many frozen positions did you say we have now? Is it 34?
Right now, we've
32?
pulled back. We're over 30. You know, that number is Dawn.
Right around
Dawn,
30.
Do you know roughly where we're at right now? 30, 32?
Okay. I know we were talking about still having the 25 frozen, and you'd mentioned we needed another police officer. Have there been other positions that are pretty critical that we've not filled? Because we're obviously not freezing the same amount that we currently have frozen, and you were just saying we might be able to continue and adapt to this current level other than the one officer. So I was just curious where the additional number was.
Yeah, well, you know, so where we're at currently, there's only a few that we have added back in. The one police officer, of course, the customer service tech, a mechanic. We're down. We had 4 mechanics. We have budgeted for 1 mechanic to go back into the Public Works Department. And it's my understanding where they're struggling at 2, you have a lead mechanic, which is sort of the manager that's scheduling work. You know, yes, they're working on vehicles, but they're also doing a little bit of the admin side. And they're struggling with just 2 in the shop to do both. So there's a third one that we feel is needed there, so that the lead mechanic can have time to schedule work, order supplies, really kind of conduct the administrative part of that. And I do want to brag on our department directors and all of their staff, because when we pull back, it does require significant change. It does require more work, but it also requires a lot of heavy lifting of going back and thinking, okay, how do you rework the workflow or the process map? How do you map this out? What is in there that we can get rid of and still accomplish what we need to get done? And that requires a lot of thought. And you know, the FY27 budget, I'll talk about in a few minutes, but it sets the stage for being able to do those things. But I want to brag on them because they're here, they're serving the residents of Radford, they care. Clearly, they're dedicated. They've taken on the work, so it's a benefit to work with them. I think we have great staff, and I just want to give them credit because pulling back does require reworking those departments and changing their workflows. So, and our department
I think
directors.
that is a great point, and we're so thankful to all the folks who work for the city. And I think we're going to talk about that a little bit later in your presentation about the next step for that, because what we've done is that reduction part that saves a little bit of money and refocuses and all that, but then there's work that has to be done following that to really get where we need to be, and we'll talk about that in a little while, right?
Yes, we need. So once you make the cut, then you've got to take a look at it, and you've got to rework your operational capacity. And yes, we'll talk about that. When we look at the proposed water rate comparison, the minimum bill in Radford would go to $28.32. Blacksburg right now, and these are the latest numbers that I have. Blacksburg is at $37.40 at the same level, 4,000 gallons. Christiansburg is at $52. Dublin is at $59.16. Town of Pulaski is $50.72, and Pulaski County is $45.50. Now, clearly, I understand that every operation works differently, so you're not always comparing apples to apples, and I understand that. But it does put it into context of where we're at with other municipalities within the New River Valley, at least these select ones. And I'd like to take a second to talk about what's in parentheses here, this target user rate. So I know there's been some conversation around, so where does our rate need to be able to qualify for grants? If we do a large project, and that can benefit the Radford residents because you're not paying as much in a loan if you can get the grant. So there is savings. There's this point of equilibrium where it benefits.
But Todd, I think the point that we need to make is right now, we do not qualify for grants because our rates are so low.
That's correct.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
So we can't apply for them.
Yes. Right now, $28.32 is approximately 59% of where we need to be. That target user rate is where we need to be to qualify for most of those. That's what a lot of these funding agencies use, that target user rate. It's calculated by taking 1% of the median household income, dividing by or multiplying by 1%, divide that number by 12. And when we do that for the city of Radford, median household income is $57,348. Multiply that by 1%, divide by 12. Our target user rate is $47.79, which, interesting enough, puts us, we're still in the lower half of these other municipalities around us. That would put us above Blacksburg and Pulaski, but below Christiansburg, Dublin, and Pulaski, the town of Pulaski.
And I just wanted to point out something to your point, Jesse. We brought this up a couple years ago. We hadn't really talked about water rate in comparison to infrastructure investment. And Christiansburg, our friends over in Christiansburg, did a massive $2.2 million water line replacement. Actually, I think the total ended up being about $4.4 million with $2.2 million funded through grants. As an example of that, having to fund that because we don't qualify for the grant and still needing to do projects like that, spreading that multi-million dollars on the residents would be as much or more potentially than that additional rate increase, because a few dollars equals a couple $100,000. So that's one of the challenges to being able to do that. And I think that's hard for us because we hadn't really talked about it in those terms previously, that we were actually missing money as a locality and setting ourselves up for future infrastructure expenses by charging so little. Again, that affects everybody's bottom line, and we get that. Yes. But that's a big surprise for a lot of us to look at and go, oh, we're significantly lower, and that's not always a great thing because it limits what we can do for some of this needed infrastructure we're talking about.
It is, and you know, one example where that could come into play, let's take the water treatment plant. If it were to reach the end of its life and it required a major renovation or a complete rebuild, something along those lines, you're looking at tens of millions of dollars. It's going to climb really high. When you look at, and I couldn't put numbers on this and I couldn't guarantee it, but that is a scenario where if the rate is not high enough to qualify for the grants, the rates may have to go higher than they otherwise would have doing that project with the grants. So yes, there are situations where not being able to qualify would run the rate up higher than if we met that target user rate. If we had a large project, it could affect it, yes.
So when you have on here its proposed water rate, is the rate that we're proposing now $28.32? That's the new rate?
That would be the minimum.
Right,
bill.
and so here's what you have to keep in mind too, just for our viewers. That would be our 2026, 2027 rate. But the rates that we're comparing against, that we still fall very low behind, are last year's rates for the communities around us. This is not their new rates, this is their old rates. So our new rate still has us very far below what everyone else is able to function on.
Every municipality is doing the exact same thing we're doing right now. They're looking at the rates. They're going to be making adjustments. So yes, that's very true. These numbers are always a moving target, and they may be again this year. These numbers may change within a matter of weeks or a couple months.
Have you applied that calculation to our neighbors to see if they are within the standards of being able to qualify for grants and things? Are they applying,
I have not.
I'm just
Good
curious.
question.
It sounds
Yeah,
like
that's a good
Christiansburg has. Yes, I'm asking about the other ones,
Yeah.
not just Christiansburg.
It's a good question. But we have not done that, but that would be interesting. We could
Just
pull the
curious
data.
if they are,
Yeah.
making sure they're staying able to be able to fund some infrastructure. It sounds like, we're going to be in need in the next, hopefully 10 years, but maybe less than that.
We could pull that from census data and find the median household income. That
I
would
was
be,
just
we could get that done
curious.
pretty quick.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yes, probably. Thank you.
yes. Any more questions? All right. Real estate. So we're proposing to go from 82 cent to 87 cent. That is a 5% increase. Just wanted to put that in context. The city of Galax, and once again, to Jesse's point, this is a moving target. I don't know what their FY27 number is, but they're at 92 cent. City of Salem's $1.18. Just wanted to put at least another city in there, and a city that has an electric plant, and they do have a university in Roanoke College. So I wanted to put them in there for that reason. Town of Blacksburg and Montgomery County, when we look at these, if you look at the right-hand column, those are respective to the left column. And what I mean by that is the 26 cent is Town of Blacksburg, 76 is Montgomery County. So I thought it would be good for us to take a look at. For a resident that lives in the town of Blacksburg, their real estate tax is $1.02. A resident in Christiansburg, when you count the town and county tax, is at 90 cents. Town of Pulaski and Pulaski County combined, so a resident in the town of Pulaski, $1.10. Town of Dublin and Pulaski County together, so someone living in the town of Dublin, it's 98 cents. In the town of Pearisburg in Giles County, which I have some familiarity with, Pearisburg, it's $1.02. And the town of Narrows and Giles County is $1.36. So just wanted to put that in perspective and just put it in context of where we sit with some other municipalities.
Well, and with Christiansburg, they have the sales tax that we don't have, so they're able to buffer it through other means.
Yes, Christiansburg, they get well more in mills tax than any of the other municipalities in the New River Valley. When people go out to eat, they go to Christiansburg. So
We kinda
yes,
use it like we do our electric a little
Right.
bit too, as a
Yeah.
buffer, yeah.
yeah. So what does this look like at various values? And I put home value in the left column. That should actually say real estate or property. I apologize for that. But the real estate tax at the 200,000, 300,000, 400, and 500,000 levels, this is what it looks like. Second column is current rate, what the charge would be annually. Third column is the proposed rate at 87 cents. And then on the right, that's the annual increase for a property owner at those valuations. At 200,000, it's $100 annually. At 300,000, it's $150 annually. $400,000 value, $200 annually. And at the $500,000 value level, it's $250. So every 100,000, it's about $50 annually with the 5% increase. Electric, I do want to take a little time here with electric. We've talked about a 5% increase there. So I want to start by, these are three charts we have up here. The one on the left is our current rate. The one in the middle is 5% if our customer charge goes to $7.96 from $7.02. Now that is the charge every account holder pays whether they use electricity or not. That is the minimum charge that they'll have to pay. The far right column achieves 5% increase in revenue, but it works those numbers a little differently. So I'd like to walk through these just for a few minutes. On the left, so our customer charge, or the customer charge that we have, that's the bare minimum, as I said earlier, that anyone's going to pay at $7.02. The energy charge at 1,000 kilowatt hour level would be $100.95. That's where we're currently at. The fuel at the bottom, the new rate at 1,000 kilowatt hours residential would be $107.97. The fuel cost, WPCA, which I do want to talk about WPCA a little bit, that is a pass-through. The city collects it, we don't keep it, it's a pass-through. That's not a revenue source for the city of Radford. That is something we have to collect and pass on.
And that anagram stands for wholesale power cost adjustment, correct?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Just so people know, because that's on their bills and people wonder that all the time.
Yes. So the total bill right now for someone would be $173.02. With a 5% rate increase, and if we keep the customer charge at $7.96, we can work through the same numbers at 1,000 kilowatt hour. But essentially, if we leave the customer charge at $7.96 with minimal increase there, the monthly bill at 1,000 kilowatt hours would be $181.61. That's roughly an $8.59 increase at the 1,000 kilowatt hour. What we are proposing is the far right column. The customer charge, that minimum that a customer would pay, whether they're using electricity or not, would be $20. But that drives down the energy charge. And how that works through the math and through the 1,000 kilowatt hour level, when we push it through that filter, it's actually a lower rate increase at that level. It's $180.30, which you can see is slightly lower. It's not 5%, it's 4.2. Now, you have different consumption levels throughout Radford. The rest would be made up through that energy charge through higher people that are consuming more electricity, more power. A couple reasons we're recommending this. Number one, it does seem to be at the lower consumption levels. It may put less of a burden on people that are using less electricity. The second thing is that customer charge. We do have accounts in the city, and it's solar people that have implemented solar power in the residence. They may be using no electricity from the city of Radford during some months. At $7, when you calculate, and I've talked to Tim, and Tim, thank you for the information. When you start to think about the meter, installing the meter, maintenance of the meter, reading the meter, and then on these accounts, it's my understanding that it has to be entered by hand at this point. The salary we're paying staff and the time they're spending manually entering that, we're losing money at $7. The city is losing money on those accounts at $7.96. At $20, we get closer to recouping those costs, at least break even, not lose money. So that's what, Tim and I have talked quite a bit, quite extensively about it, and Trish as well, but we feel that right column is best for the city of Radford, and that's what we're recommending.
I just want to give you kudos for looking into that. That's getting creative and really digging into it. So that's really well done with you and Tim. Thank you.
And I'd like you to talk a little bit more about why, in addition to certainly we need more revenue, but why a rate increase at this level anyway? Because we had our consultants take a look at it. They made recommendations. What would happen if we didn't increase the rate?
If we don't increase the rate, so first of all, our consultants took into account cogen, they took into account market rates. We're getting ready to make a major change to our the way we procure power for wholesale. They've taken that into account, and they've taken into account our operating costs, those shift. So all of those are included or baked into that calculus that they've given us. If we pull back and we don't implement these rate increases, it's going to become more difficult to operate the electric department. The electric department, we have clearly infrastructure projects we need to get completed. We're trying to keep the electric department solvent, and not only solvent, but keeping it in a position where it can continue to function. Because it's not just about balancing the electric budget, it's also about making sure they have the equipment and they've got what they need to make sure that the power actually, that it works. So it would eat into our ability to fund those things.
Well, and I think that's an important distinction to make, that, the electric world has changed significantly in the 20 years that we had the contract, but the last 5 years, it's like a completely different world. And that's one of the things that has made it so challenging, because I've had a lot of folks say, my bill is higher than it's ever been. I can't believe Radford's having any kind of challenge with its revenue. But our margin has been significantly challenged with all these changes. Is that accurate?
That is accurate. Tim, would you agree?
And so we have to do something or else it doesn't make sense. Now, what does this do to us? Let's say we go with the far right column in our comparison to our neighbors that use maybe AEP or like Virginia Tech where they have, or Blacksburg where they have some Virginia Tech electricity. Are we going to be competitive in those areas?
That's a good question. I don't have the answer. Tim, you don't have that with you, do you? Absolutely. Actually, if you want to step to the podium and talk about what you have. Absolutely.
Okay, again, Jesse, this is old information because this is as of July of last year. Virginia Tech was $179.33. City of Salem, $157.14. Let's see. Town of Bedford, 154.02. Danville, 141. City of Martinsville, 173. Town of Richlands, $190. So,
Is that their base rate? Because when I'm looking at the WPCA transfer and those numbers drive it up, is that what?
this is just an average, so I'm comparing the total highlighted value to the numbers that I've given you.
Well, and that's one of the challenges we face, because we used to be able to do $6 to $8 to $12 million transfers with a lower rate because we had more margin. And that margin has just evaporated on us, which is why we've had to charge what we charge. We're not making the level margin we used to make, but we have that. And I'd asked that question about Salem before. They have several large, heavy electric users. Is that correct? And that
They just
changes
lost
their
one.
ability to offer what they offer, correct?
Correct. And I've got 32 utilities here in the state with customer charges. We're number one for the lowest. It goes from $7.02 for Radford up to $40 for a co-op, so.
So, you know, there's a lot of challenges with all of this. Do we know what AEP's rate is right now? I think they were right at 179, 180 last year when we were at that rate, or 175?
Correct. They've had a reduction this past year. I think they're about ready to have a slight increase.
Okay. So we're competitive, but it's not like it used to be, where we were 20 or 30 or 40% below, we had massive margin, and we're able to transfer so much over. And I think that's a really important distinction for folks to understand. A lot of this is out of our hands, that, you know, the cost to us is what it is. The way it's structured, where we've been able to transfer these revenues all these years, we either decide to not transfer them, and that could either, we save that for capital projects or the rate's lower, and that means property taxes have to go up or things along that line, or we charge more. And I just wanted to get that across because I think that's tough for all of us to understand, and I appreciate you helping us with that.
Let me add one more point. You know, the higher the fixed cost is here, it helps our cash flows as well, because in the shoulder months where we're not purchasing or selling as much energy, you know, those
Right.
cash is a little bit higher.
And one last piece on this that's not really part of the budget, but it's something we have to consider. We've had several of our solar customers talk about the annual net metering versus monthly net metering. We've had to sort this out before we can even begin to address that again. Is that correct?
Correct. And we also probably need to get with the billing office and see what's the way that we can do this in the fairest way.
Well, and I wanted people to know, we've not ignored those concerns of folks who have attempted to bring solar power on and to deal with that, but this is such a complicated piece with us moving from our wholesale power contract that's been in place to market purchase, to being able to make these different things to go. This rate study's been, what, about a year?
The cost service study was based on 2020.
Okay, so it's several years' worth of data. So it's just a lot to try to consume as a locality to figure out where we need to be. And Todd, you feel like that far right recommendation is the best outcome we could possibly have at this point in time?
I do, and I want to thank Tim because he's been so helpful and productive with that and helping us sift through all this data. But yes, absolutely, the far right column.
Thing with the solar customers, you know, there's a lot of conversation about trying to grandfather in our current solar users, not for that base rate, but for their carryover energy. Have we done that? So they at least, the plan that they were under when they invested in solar, we're honoring that and not changing it midstream?
So that is on our mind, and we've had conversations. We've taken no action on it, but now that we have this, we can certainly digest it and come up with a plan of action for that. So that'll be forthcoming.
Because that'll be a line item we have to consider. Essentially, that'll be a budget item we have to take into account. And I think this was I don't want to say a moving target, but it was an unknown target of where we needed to be before we could make that net metering decision and go from there. I agree, it's a big challenge as people have made investments based on where we were. But just like we were saying a minute ago, where we were is not where we are because the market has shifted so much with us. Just trying to figure out where we needed to be was such a big challenge.
Yeah, yes. And you know, this was the first piece that had to fall into place before we could really start to take a look at that. Now that we have it, I just want to clarify, we'll have a recommendation forthcoming. We're going to have to look into a lot of things with it, but now that we have this, we can have a recommendation for council on that. So we'll work on developing that. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to just go on. Were there any more questions or comments with regard to the electric rate? Okay. Things that the budget does not accomplish. I wanted to talk about those a little bit. I think we have to look at the budget and all of its, from all angles. You know, we went through our non-governmental agencies. We did not include those in this budget. So I just want to make clear. Trish, did we add any back in? Were there any required that we had to add back in? Not to put you on the spot, but.
I don't think we added any more than what we.
Okay, okay. So we haven't made any additions there. We've talked about capital. I'm not going to go back through that again, but clearly capital is still an area of concern and not funded to the level that it really needs to be. We're not significantly growing fund balances. FY27 takes an incremental step with with the current proposed budget. With the enterprise funds, there's no growth to the general. I think, you know, when we look at Radford's recent history, our recent financial history, I do think we're making some progress. There are no loans needed to balance this budget. This budget is balanced with its own revenue, and that may be a step. There are, you know, we saw on that one slide, there are some small incremental gains in 3 of our enterprise funds, and those can add up. And, you know, as I said earlier, we can't get to the levels we need to be overnight, but I do think this budget, it's my opinion that this budget, it does take an incremental step. It keeps the arrow pointed in the right direction, and it is taking a small step toward where we need to be. It does not reduce the general fund's dependency on transfers. Actually, that's increased a little bit this year. So just keep that in mind. We're not reducing its dependency on transfers. And, you know, this kind of goes hand in hand with capital and the growth of fund balances, but thinking about stabilization funds. When you have things like COVID hit or a hurricane or, you know, infrastructure could fail and it be very expensive, those are unaccounted for events that can happen. They could happen in FY27. FY27 does not create significant funds to deal with those. So just keep that in mind. If something significant were to happen that cost millions of dollars, the city could still require a loan to address them. But so the stabilization funds, that kind of comes with growing your fund balances and also reducing your risk through investment in preventative maintenance and proactive maintenance of infrastructure. So I just wanted to take a realistic look at the budget, and I wanted to be honest with everyone about the budget. It does have its limits. The fiscal year proposed budget does accomplish the following: 2% COLA for employees. That is in there. It fully funds the schools. It fully funds the local required effort and the local required match in the total amount of $5,994,000 and $5,994,142. So it's fully funded LRE, LRM. It prevents the erosion of fund balances. Looking at the other side of that coin, we're making an incremental gain. It's preventing erosion, and that's a step for Radford. I think that's a positive step. It invests approximately $90,000, and I want to talk about this last bullet a little bit, but the budget does have built into it approximately $90,000 to reorganize and create a continuous improvement lean management program, and I'm talking about implementing a very specific methodology, Lean Six Sigma. One person can't implement that in an operation as large as Radford. What I'm asking for is to at least get 3 green belts trained up. They can serve as project. We want continuous improvement projects. So improvement projects are where we learn to live at these staffing levels we're at. We take a look at work processes. We process map. What is going on from beginning to end with our operations, and getting down into the weeds of how do we do our work? Is there anything in our work that's unnecessary that we can get out? That helps us operate with reduced levels, and it saves staff time, and eventually it does show up on your financial books. It shows up on the ledger. So if I can, I'd like to take a minute or two to talk about this. So when I've mentioned it several times when I talk about lean and continuous improvement, with regards to Radford, and just conversationally, it literally means working every day to make city services better. That is continuous improvement. You're always looking for a way to make it better, large, small. It's always keeping the arrow pointed in that direction, and it's never done. So continuous improvement doesn't mean you reach perfection. You never reach perfection. It's that you're setting standards and you're trying to achieve them, and when you get a certain workflow or certain work process achieving at a level that you want it to be working at, you maintain it, and you watch it, and you monitor it. Because all systems, once you get them improved, they naturally go back out of control again. So you're always tending to it. And that needs to be the city of Radford's comfort zone, that we are always tending to quality and lean and efficiency. It's ongoing. It's not done. That we make services better, faster, simpler. We need to simplify some of the processes we have, because simplifying it will improve the quality. We need to focus on what residents need most. That has an entire methodology. What do our residents really need in Radford? We need to focus on that. The principles, or really in a nutshell, it means fix problems, keep moving. Don't stop. You fixed one problem, don't sit back and say, well, fix that, and, well, we're done for 3 months. No, fix a problem and keep moving. Go to the next one. Not just once, but you're always doing it. Do it all the time. It's your culture. It's how you think of what you do. And we already have people that do that. We have great staff. We have staff that already thinks along these lines. We just need to build up our capacity to implement it. Remove steps that don't add value. Anything that we are doing, or it could be in a workflow, an expenditure, the cell phones. It could be something we're doing in a workflow process. If it's not needed, don't do it. We're using resources. We're using time. We're using effort. Get rid of those things. That leads to the next bullet. Use time and taxpayer money wisely and efficiently. We need to make sure that especially the condition we've been in and that we currently continue to be in, every financial expenditure needs to be spent very wisely and very targeted and high impact. It needs to be as high impact as we can make it. We need to listen to employees and residents. There are a lot of issues in the city. I'm not aware of them. City council may not be aware of them, even department directors. But the person out there fixing the potholes may see it. They see things that we don't see. And finding a way to capture that knowledge, the knowledge of residents. How do we residents have a lot of knowledge about what's going on in their neighborhoods. What's wrong with it? How do we gain information from them? We need to get better at that. And we do it, but we can get better. And we need to focus on that. And we can target our operations and what we're doing and what we're spending money on in ways that are high impact and are wanted by the residents of the city of Radford and by the city council. Bottom line, do the right work the right way with less waste so Radford residents can get better service. That's the bottom line. Just want to look, when I talk about waste, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, I just want to outline, when you look at an organization through the lens of lean management, Six Sigma, there are 8 wastes. They plague public agencies, private agencies, NGOs, pretty much any organization that has any kind of complex operation whatsoever. You're going to find these 8 wastes. Defects, overproduction, waiting, non-utilized talent, transportation, inventory, motion, extra processing.
So that is a perfect place, because I think we're waiting with bated breath to hear more about that. Can we take a 5-minute break and then come back to that to finish up?
Absolutely.
Would that be good? We're going to take a 5-minute break. We'll see you in about 7:03, 7:04. We did good. That was a 5-minute break. Outstanding. That's progress.
Yes. So if it pleases council, I'll continue to finish this slide up.
Why don't you start over? Since we had to break you here, why don't you go back and do the description of what you're talking about?
Sure. So when we talk about trying to implement continuous improvement and the continuous improvement culture and set the knowledge and to learn how to use, there are very specific tools that can be used for this, but we have to have the capacity to know how to use them, how to implement them, and then how to make corrections that actually do improve work processes. Now, the danger is if you try to implement some of these tools and you do it wrong, you could damage an organization. So you could actually make things worse. So that's why I'm asking for very specific training, some very specific investment in continuous improvement. And I think, when we talk about achieving savings and reducing the cost and the demand from the taxpayer to reduce things by 25 employees, this is how we invest in that. If we're going to save, $1.5 million to $2 million on personnel, well, we need to invest a little, maybe $90,000 back into, okay, we're at these staffing levels. We may be able to hold them long term, but how do we do that? And getting the know-how to do that, investing $90,000 back into that can help us achieve long-term savings. So it helps us learn to operate effectively at those levels, not just survive at those levels, but how to do it well at those levels. And just to start over, so the whole premise of what we're looking at doing is having a system and a culture that is able to identify not just, and I'm focusing on waste, but there's a quality component to it as well. But to focus on waste, when you look at an organization through the lens of Lean Six Sigma, there's 8 wastes that are in there. And I'll just repeat them, go back through them. Defects, overproduction, waiting, non-utilized talent, transportation, inventory or backlog of work or paperwork, motion, extra processing, or over-processing something. What these look like in operations would be, defects. Whenever you do something wrong, you have to go back and you have to rework it. You have to do it again or fix it. Well, that's time, effort, and often money. You may have to scrap the resources you used to begin with, or it's a cost to time. You may have to pay overtime for an employee to go back and rework something that if it was done right the first time, you don't have to do that. It saves cost. Overproduction, that's producing something too early or in greater quantity than is needed, which can create backlogs and problems. If you were to think about storage, it can create issues there. Waiting, idle time, when work is delayed, and also using idle time effectively. Sometimes when we're waiting to complete a task, another task can be completed. Being efficient with time, it's not just standby time. But idle time when work is delayed, waiting, or it could be something as simple as, well, the crew's assembled and they're ready to mow Bissett Park. I'm just making this up. They're ready to mow Bissett Park. They're waiting on the mowers. Where are the mowers? Things like that. Non-utilized talent, that goes back to, the street level public servant or even frontline supervisors. They have a tremendous amount of knowledge that senior level managers, department directors, the city manager, even council may not be aware of. So we almost take if we can push the initiative out to the street level, we can get more effective at addressing problems, because when we push the initiative out and decisions can start to be made at that level, the pothole doesn't have to wait on clearance from the supervisor or the department director or ultimately the city manager. We know what we want the roads to look like. We know we want the pothole fixed. Well, fix it. Cut out the waste that's in that. Just get it fixed. It will reduce time getting that fixed. And we already have people that do that. I don't want to make it sound like we don't. We have employees and servants. They're doing that. We just want to entrench it and make it part of our culture as we move forward. And non-utilized talent, we have people here that, to be quite honest, they're capable of a lot more than we're asking of them, decision-making wise, planning wise, strategic vision for how to address issues. They have a lot of knowledge, so we need to utilize that. Transportation, unnecessary movement of materials or information, that could be in an office setting, paperwork. Going from one end of the building to the other, maybe it's being walked there. When you can move these things closer together, reduce that time. Out, with public works or staff, and I'm certainly not picking on mowing, I'm not, it's just on my brain this evening, but, movement of materials, if we mow, a piece of property on the west end of town, and we know we have others in that area, but instead of mowing those, we go over to the eastern part of town, and I don't know that we're doing that, this is completely hypothetical, but if you go all the way across town, well, you've had to move equipment and people, that's two of the ways, and you're losing time in transport, you're paying extra in fuel, just reorganizing simple things like that, taking care of things that are close together. If we're on a property, and just to continue, and then I'm going to get off the mowing, if we mow a property, and just making sure that it's finished before going to the next one, rather than sort of batching this work or keeping, make sure it's mowed and weed eated. Don't mow it, leave, go to the next one, and then plan to come back to weed eat. Just get it done and then go to the next one. So things like that. And please, we have a great mowing crew. I want to say that. I'm certainly not, that's a hypothetical, and I just wanted to use that. But inventory, accumulation of work not yet completed, I struggle with that one myself. It's bottlenecking. That's another word for it. It's when work starts to accumulate until it affects your capacity, and it can paralyze certain sections of an organization when you get too much bottlenecking. So figuring out ways, there are tools that we can use to eliminate those bottlenecks. But we've got to learn how to use them, and we've got to have the infrastructure in place to do them. But preventing bottlenecks. Motion, that's the same as transportation, except it's with people. And making sure that we don't have any unnecessary movement of people. That can be across the city, across a building, running stuff back and forth between a building, those types of things. Trying to find and identify those things, get rid of them. And extra processing or over-processing, doing more steps than is actually required to meet the need. That's a form of waste because you're using time, effort, and often money. It ends up being money. So I just want to speak about waste a little bit because we talk about it a lot. I've never really went into the weeds of it or the detail of it, but just want to take a minute to talk about that and what we're really targeting to get rid of. When we talk about lean and cutting, we pulled back on staff, but this is really what we're talking about when we say lean out. Lean out a process, lean out, what's going on. This is really what we're talking about, and this is how you operate at those levels.
Well, and I think this is so important, and we need to have this discussion, and we'll have more on this as we move over the next few weeks and months, because having the employees that we do have in the right positions with the right training, with the right titles, with the right responsibilities is what we've needed to do for a number of years. Eliminating positions, not people, but eliminating those expenses is fantastic. That helps us get further in the budget, but it doesn't necessarily position us, because where we eliminate, we may not have folks targeted in the right places for what needs to happen. And so this is really a crucial part of this entire piece, not just the cost savings part, but really getting to the most optimized and efficient version of the Radford City government that we could possibly be. So I'm very excited. I know, just a little behind the scenes, when we were interviewing and looking for city managers, this was one of the things that was really special about Todd, in addition to some of the things he showed you with the budget tonight in terms of how he practiced his budget revenue projections, talking about the Six Sigma, talking about how to work with optimizing what we have as a council. At least I'll speak for myself, and everybody else can chime in if they want to. This was exciting for us because this is something we had been wanting for our community for years and years, to say, can we be the very best version of Radford that we can be? And we saw Todd as a person who could potentially do that. Now you're seeing that come into play as a budget line item to allow us to have the tools to then help the folks that work here to be in those spots for success and to position that. So it's really exciting to see all this come into play just a little less than a year after we brought you on board and to go from there. But I don't know, Council, I mean, that was something that was exciting when we were talking about the interviews. And I think this is an incredibly important part of your budget for next year, even though it's not the largest line item.
Thank you.
I'll just tie in and say I agree, Todd. I think that for you to be, when we were interviewing you, it really struck me, one, how efficient you were with being able to compile data and putting it in a user-friendly, this is what it is, and I think that you've done an excellent job, and this is just, a fraction of what you show us behind the scenes, and you've really done a really good job of streamlining this, and not only just, I think to David's point, eliminating costs, but maximizing things too. I think that, and I know that you were very, very adamant about investment in our people, and I know that we all are too, and to be able to find a COLA and start building that back. So I thought that this was a good representation of what you've been working on, and I know you've been working hard, and you did a great job tonight on your presentation. So yeah, thank you.
Have we thought about, and maybe you've already covered this, but I know the Commissioner of Revenue and our treasurer, they're new, and through conversation, they're looking at their processes and procedures, and they're so vital to the citizens and the community. Are we going to make this available, the Six Sigma training available to them if it's something that they'd like to also take part in?
So I haven't included it in the budget, but I think it's a good idea or a good conversation to have.
Okay.
If they're interested.
Yeah, I think if
Yeah.
they're interested, and, they are tasked with creating these new processes and procedures, and I think this might be beneficial if something they're interested in. The other thing that I have a question on, and you're probably waiting for me to ask it, the other department that I don't see us really comparing our rates on is the trash collection. Have we looked at that? Do we know where we are in comparison to other communities?
I don't have a comparison to other communities tonight, but I'll have it. I can have it by Monday.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you, Todd.
Have we gone out for RFP for the garbage?
We have not, but that's on our radar.
Okay.
I had one more thing that I wanted to bring up, and we do have some conversations prior to these presentations as the budget's being developed. Can you talk a little bit about how we're not changing the rate for personal property, but we're expecting some slightly different outcomes? Can you share some of that a little bit?
Sure. So I can talk a little bit about the projection for personal property and the data and how we worked with it. So when we made a projection on personal property, we did use a trend line. And I'll very quickly, I don't want to get too much into the weeds of it, but very quickly, when we're trending personal property, what we did, we actually trended, instead of the actual amount, the total levies. So you trend the total levies, come up with your next data point for the levy, and then from there, we looked at the current tax rate, and then you start looking at, I'm not going to call it a collection rate, but what we took were the actual amounts that Munis showed that we were bringing in. So we took the levy, the actual amounts that Munis shows bringing in, and going back 10 years, it looked like Munis would show in that revenue line item roughly 60% of the levy, 63%, 65%, and for the past 3 years, it has went, and please forgive me, it was lower 70s for 2 of the data points. These are the last 3 years. 2 of the data points were low 70%, and then the latest data point was upper 70s. And if you look at a trend, which you really can't trend 3 data points, but if you look at it, it's pointing toward about 80%. So right now the budget for just personal property, none of the other items in there, but just personal property, the current budget assumes about 80%, but we'll certainly have to monitor that. There's a lot of new moving pieces, and we'll have to watch that going forward.
Well, and first of all, I want to say thank you so much to our new Commissioner of Revenue and our new Treasurer, because I know the cooperation with staff has been just absolutely amazing, and we're so appreciative of that, because that's an important part of us figuring some of this out. But I think the other part to that is there's really 2 parts to anything we do from a revenue perspective. There's the rate that we set, so we have this anticipated amount, and then there's what we actually realize. And if that's going to be 60% of what's projected, or 70% or 80%, we have to kind of know that to be able to say, okay, yes, this might technically generate $1 million, but it may really only be 800,000 or 600,000 or whatever that is. Can you talk a little bit anecdotally? I know you didn't do a big study about this, about what you've experienced when you were in Parisburg, for example, on that rate.
So Parisburg, we used, of course, Edmunds financial management software or enterprise software. But in Parisburg, which it's a town and, operates a little bit differently, but typically when I would budget for personal property or somewhere, it'd be 90%, 95%, somewhere in that range is what we would look for and typically bring in off of that. I know in Parisburg, we used a very robust DMV stop program. And for anyone that doesn't know what that is, someone doesn't pay their personal property tax on their vehicle, they can't renew their tax. So you put a DMV stop. Now, they may not come in that month. Maybe there's 11 months before they have to renew. But once they hit that, they cannot renew their tags for their vehicle. It can be very effective. I do not know much about the DMV stop program in Radford. I can't speak to that.
Well, and, just to that point, I look at it, I'm excited because that's opportunity for improvement, just like we've been talking about this continuous improvement. But it also shows that perhaps there has been some unrealized revenue in the past that maybe be an opportunity, but also can explain why we've had some periods where revenues haven't been as robust. One of the things we've talked about is the challenges in producing enough revenue that when you see these expenses in our budget, how do you get there? How do you produce that revenue? And trying to find things like that. So kudos to you and to our commissioner and to our treasurer for helping us figure out where maybe we weren't optimizing the realizing of revenues and things. And there's more to that story as we move forward that I think we can get into as we move throughout the year. But that's a really important piece, and it's exciting to see that we're not maxed out on everything. We're not at 98% on every single point, and yet we're still not meeting the mark with some of the revenues we need. There's room where we could potentially be there, and it's not necessarily charging those that are currently paying those things more. And I think that's a real important piece to bring up. Thank you so much for all the things that you've done. I wanted to get to several of these points. The creative thought about the electric, trying to say it's not just a rate increase. We do need to do something because our consultants have said this is where you better be so that you can actually be solvent and move forward, but finding a way to do it that minimizes that burden on our consumers. Thank you for figuring out, yes, we've made these reductions in staff. Now, how do we help those folks be the best version of what they're doing now and how we're doing things differently? I think that's so important. And thank you to the staff for all the hard work done. One of the things that you don't see is a lot of the behind-the-scenes work. We don't even see that as council members. We hear it, but we're not in the trenches. We've had folks who have had to rebuild an awful lot of things within our finance department, within the entire budgeting structure of the city, and that's happened. And it's really exciting to see that result in, we're not doing this 2 weeks from now. We managed to meet the April 1st deadline, which is fantastic, and we have time to have some more discussion on this. But, thank you, Todd. I'll leave it at that. I know we've got a little more business to talk about before we finish up tonight, but does anybody have any questions or comments they want to make?
Well, I just want to thank you also, Todd, for a good report. A lot of stuff there to look at, so thank you very much. And thanks for the rest of the team that's put input into this. So thank you.
And I know you'll probably,
And it was a team effort. Department directors, Trish, the finance team, it was a team effort. And they've been wonderful. Yes. Couldn't have got it done without them, especially our new finance department. So thank you. Thank you, Guy.
real quick clarification, so just so the public's aware, none of these rates or anything like that are decided upon tonight. It's for us to take home, digest, and then what are the next steps for us to get across the finish line?
So the decision that has to be made tonight, we have to advertise tomorrow.
Right.
And the way we advertise that is a rate not to exceed. So we'll have to put the advertisement out. Now, certainly, we can't go above the advertised rate, but there can be negotiation, down from those rates. So we do need to make a decision about about the rate we want to advertise not to exceed.
Questions or comments? So just to clarify on that, right now we're looking at Adam, did you have something you want to share?
On behalf of my board, I want to thank Todd for the meetings that we had with Ms. Cox and Ms. Newby. A lot of the work you talked about behind the scenes, we did that on a pretty regular basis since Christmas. I think it meant a lot to this progress moving forward. So on behalf of my board, I'd like to thank Todd and his team and City Council for the support of our kids and our families.
Thank you, Mr. Superintendent. We appreciate that, and thank you to the school board and to everybody. Thank you, Carrie. Is Carrie? Yeah, she had to step out, but thank you to Carrie, because I know she does amazing work with everybody, too. Just to refresh everybody's memory, we have to think about this because we have to advertise it. So our water rate is $28.32 is what we would advertise as the max, correct?
That would be the minimum bill, yes.
Minimum bill, and that's what we would advertise. 5 cents on the real estate tax, so from 82 to 87 cents would be advertised. And then what ended up being, if we go with this, the 4.2% increase on electric with the new configuration. Or would you say make that 5%, and then we have the ability to adjust between those?
5 overall.
Yeah.
5 overall, okay. So 5% overall. Have I missed anything that we need to consider for our rates?
I like the fact that Jesse mentioned that we have not really looked at our trash rates. Is that something that we would need to advertise to, okay, so
Yeah.
we're not going to be able to do that because we don't have the information.
Well,
So
we
that's,
can't do it with this budget. Now, if city council wants to take a look at that rate, we can make that change later.
okay, so that's one of the ones we can make later.
Yeah, you're not limited to just this time of the year. If you wanted to make that change, it would require a public hearing, and
Yeah.
you know, it would require all the necessary steps. But that could be done, you know, it could be done in October. It could be done in June, July.
There's some changes that can only be made right now.
It's primarily
Tax
the
tickets.
taxes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wanted to be clear that there can be changes throughout the year except for taxes.
That's correct.
Okay, I just wanted to be clear on that. Thank you.
1 second.
And also,
The trash, solid waste. I'll confirm with Mike on solid waste.
okay, thanks.
Yep.
Any other questions or comments?
The water rate can be changed. Doesn't have to be advertised.
No, it has to be advertised.
It does have to be advertised.
But we can change it later on in the year if we
Well,
decide
that's what I
to.
meant. Yeah,
Yes.
I was asking.
So maybe for
Well-
clarity, what
Because I'm
what
really
can we not
concerned-
change? What after today
Can we-
can we change versus not change? Where do we have future flexibility where we don't have to wait the year?
So, so that I don't misstep, I'm going to ask the city attorney that question. I just don't want to give you a bad answer. So I'll ask
Kind of
Mike.
makes it tough on
but-
us.
Well, I think if we think
Advertising
we
does
want
not lock
more,
you
we
in.
can advertise at a higher rate. Like if the water rate's a concern and we want to say, we need flexibility here and it needs to be $29 or $30 or whatever that number is, we could advertise at that rate. We don't have to actually do that, but that gives us the flexibility
I
in the
think
next
that's
few
the
weeks.
question, though, that
Yeah,
we're
but
we're asking.
I'm really concerned about not getting that grant money.
Yes.
I mean, I know.
I agree.
From 24 to 47 is a huge, huge jump, but yeah, I'm sorry. I was talking about the water rate going from 24 to that 47 that we would need to be eligible for grant money. And I know that's a huge increase, and people aren't going to like it, but I don't see how we can keep putting off being able to get that money. So I think we really need to, if that needs to be advertised at 47 or whatever, and then we can back off, then that's what we need to do for the advertisement.
So when is the absolute final deadline for choosing what the advertised rates are? Is it tonight before we walk out of this building, or is it tomorrow by noon, or is it?
It would require you all to decide tonight, the meeting. It'll require a motion from the council, but you can go up on the rate from what we've recommended tonight. If you wanted to go $2 on the water, and that would increase it, or if you want to go $3, you can make that decision tonight, and we can advertise it. It'll change the numbers in the budget, and we'll update those, but you can go higher.
The number that I that any of us, I think, may potentially propose greatly changes if I'm unable to change the rate later on in the year. So that really affects my decision. So if we have to decide tonight, I'd really like an answer before I decide that amount.
The advertised amount?
No, whether we can change the water, like can we,
Or the trash, or,
well, the trash I think is fine to change, but the water is definitely a concern of mine for the same reasons that Guy has mentioned. You know, we may be facing some very serious infrastructure issues in the very near future, and if that's something that we're not going to be able to adjust later on down, you know, in a few months or the rest of this fiscal year, I just want to know one
Okay.
way or the other.
Is Mike available? Okay.
Thank you,
We'll see if we can get an
Melissa.
answer from Mike. I just don't want to give a bad answer. It's my understanding
I
that, yes,
appreciate
those
that.
adjustments can be made,
No, I appreciate that.
but I want to make sure that I'm
We-
correct on
We
that.
do it once and we don't revisit it unless there's an emergency, like with electric or something along that line.
We may have an emergency, so
Right.
I want to know what my options are.
so, and I agree, that water rate is something I have in my notes, but I guess, and I know we're not going to be able to move mountains in one budget, but I'll be honest, the one area that I'm concerned about is natural disaster. Because right now, with us not having any funds laid aside, what we're finding is we're not able to get grants to help us with that because we don't have our part that we'd have to cooperatively add. So I don't know how council feels, but I feel like if history is any indicator of the future, I feel like we have to address that in some way. It can't be a flat line item. I feel like we need some money in there to address it.
Yes, I agree.
So what do you propose? How do we get that? What's the most impactful, least intrusive way?
And just to add on, the only thing I will add is with this 5 cent increase, you know, that'd be 23 cent in 3 years. And I mean, we do have to account for that too. Unfortunately, it doesn't move the needle like we'd like it to, but that does affect people's living. But I mean, I agree. I mean, we all know that capital improvements are a must. And, you know, unfortunately, when you have a massive thing to overcome like we are, it's been challenging. But how do we, I mean, I think we're taking baby steps here. I just don't want to push the needle too far one way. I mean, we went up 13 cents last year, which was, I mean, that was big. But I understand everyone's point too, to look at that.
I have an idea. That could be a possibility. And I asked about this because I'd asked about the water rate as well. Todd and I had talked about that pretty extensively. If we go up an additional $1 per 1,000 gallons, which is how the rate is based, and then that results in our minimum charge of, you know, $28 for 4,000 gallons or so, it generates, did you say 200, around 200,000, 190, something like that?
Yeah.
Around 400,000. Okay, so it's even bigger. So if we do this, we can put that money, just like we transfer it now, if we decided to have additional charges on water that get us closer toward that minimum requirement for grants, that money could be used for disasters, for other things as needed, in addition to infrastructure investment and things along that line. So that could be a compromise, because I don't disagree. I would hate to see us continue to go up on the real estate tax quickly. I think it's something that, in a measured way, has to happen over really the next 5 or 10 years as we build on that, because clearly that has to be sustainable. But that might be an option for us, because we can generate several $100,000 with just a single dollar that translates to your $4 bill each month for the water. And it gets us closer to the point that's brought up about not meeting the grants, but it provides us a little cushion for other things, natural disasters and things that line. Does that make sense for everybody?
I think I just want to address something that Seth was mentioning. So while I also, we raise taxes, it impacts us too. So no one likes to raise taxes because my bill gets larger too. So who does that to themselves? But the reality is, when we were advised several years that we could hold steady. And so we did not raise rates, as you see the other people who are actually addressing inflation around us were. So our citizens went several years with really, a decent deal in comparison to the other localities around us, because we were not raising truly at in hindsight, at the rate that we needed to have raised all along. So our folks have had a bit of a reprieve, but we see what now, now we know what we need to do, and by not acting, then, then that lays on our shoulders, because we may not like it, but as Dr. Harshbarger says, math just maths, and so we can't get away from that. The truth of the matter is, we have to be able to provide the resources and the services that our citizens want us to provide, and we can't simply do that with well wishes. So I agree with you, but the other way to look at it is we're still going to be the lowest in nearly every single category, even with what we're proposing, which I think is great. I'm concerned that it may not be enough to move the needle where we really need it to be for solvency. But I do think we've also enjoyed a certain amount of reprieve that other localities haven't. It's just not sustainable to continue to do this, and we know that. We see where we're at, and it is a matter of revenue. We can clearly see by where we are in comparison to others. It's an issue of revenue.
Yeah. And I mean, but we've made up a lot of that in 3 years. I mean, these are big increases too. So I do think that it's not that we haven't addressed it, it's just addressing it all so quickly does put a burden on households that we do have to mitigate. I mean.
And I wish we had time to take another 10 years to do that,
Right.
but we see that we don't. So I agree with you. I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just, the realist in me is also, at the end of the day, we see what we're not covering. We're not even covering for a flood or a natural disaster, which is troublesome.
Right.
So we have a balanced budget, but we all know from sitting here that we're still behind in some pretty imperative areas.
We are. And it's going to take a while. When people paying $4 at the gas pump and at groceries and everything else, I mean, I'm mindful of that. It's hard, and I just want to be measured. And, yeah, I mean.
Did we get an answer?
We do. So I do feel better. Mike confirmed my instinct. Yes, you can make changes to the water and sewer, those accounts. You can make changes throughout the year. What it will require is a public hearing and most likely we'd have to do a budget amendment.
Thank
So
you
to change the
very
size of the
much.
budget, so yes.
For calling.
Boy, Mike.
I do want to make one more point about, I hate to use the word mismanaged, but clearly things were not done in the best way in prior years. So the changes that we've made, the rate changes that we made, while of course I don't want to make any more big rate changes, I feel like the changes we have made, we haven't been able to see the full benefit because we are just now uncovering a whole lot of things that maybe were not done the best way. So I think we're going to see more benefit from the changes that we've made, from the tax increases that we've made. But I do still think that, sometimes Jesse calls it a deal. Like it's a very, we've got very nice rates compared to everybody else, and it isn't sustainable. But I do feel like we're going to be able to see more of the benefits of what we've done the past couple of years. So I see both sides, and I'm very thankful we can have a little bit more flexibility with the water. Thank you guys for checking on that.
So back to our point, because we will need a motion on this, what would we like to advertise that water rate at? Do we want to keep it at the 28.32 for now? Or would we rather say, let's go one more step, and we could say that would be the 32.32, which would be $2 on the base rate, that would translate into essentially another $4 a month. What do you all want to do?
Well, I still think we need to talk seriously about getting it up to 47. So I think, but we don't have to put that as in the announcement, right?
You do.
do.
The rate not to
For
exceed.
now, we can revisit it later. So like if in 3 months, if we want to come back to
Well,
it, we
but
can
why
revisit
visit
it.
it in 3 months? I mean, either
What's
wanna
the
do it?
maximum rate that somebody wants to propose?
And I know we had talked about this too. I'm just curious, because you did a very good comparison for the real estate tax, what it would look like on the household. What would a dollar rate generally affect a household? If you could get that as we go through this, I know you're not going to have that tonight, but just something to think through. We had kind of talked about, but.
We'll have it for Monday. Yes.
Well, we do know $1 will be an additional $4 minimum. If you use more than 4,000 gallons, it'll be proportional to that, and most people don't.
Right.
Yeah, so that 4,000 gallon minimum covers the vast majority. We've looked at that in previous years. But I agree, it's nice to know for what a 10,000 gallon user is or something along that line.
Sure.
And there's not many of those.
Right.
I don't believe. I
They're
think
not.
We calculated it was what, 4 or 5 maybe
Right.
last year.
Well, for the advertisement again, you know, it's my opinion to make it whatever it has to be for the grants. Is it $47.50? Is it $48? Whatever it needs to be. That's what I'd like to do. And then when we have our work session and we discuss it, bear it
hammer it out
out,
there.
then we can decide to bring it back to,
And just for clarification, it's a $400,000 per dollar on that. Well, that would get you some reserves.
Exactly.
That'll get us ahead. And then we can apply for grants too.
But I want to caution everybody with moving too fast on that, because that's significant every month, that's one of the charges that people would see on the bottom line of their utility bill every month, and so that would be a $20 increase
well,
per month.
and I'm not trying to propose that we necessarily do it, but I
Right.
just want it to be there for our discussion.
That's where it's capped at, I guess is what you're saying. We can go from there.
We want to have as the advertised rate?
I agree with that.
Do we have a motion for that? Well, let's do this. Let's talk about all three rates. Any change to electric beyond the 5% overall that has been proposed?
No,
Any change to the 5 cents on the real estate tax that's been proposed?
no.
So the only change would be for water to be at 47.79 advertised. Now, again, I can't stress enough to the media and to those watching, we're not saying the water rate is going to $47.79. We're just saying that provides us the flexibility to have a discussion between $24 where we are now, we're at $24.32, and $47.79. So don't panic that it's already set at $47.79. And we can have that further discussion on that.
And even at that rate, we're basing it on everyone's last year's rates, and we're
Right.
still in the very
We're in the
lowest.
ballpark, yeah.
Well, we're low. We're
Right.
still one of the lowest rates compared to what their rates were last year. So we
Right.
got to keep that in mind too.
Correct.
So, do we have a motion for 5 cents real estate tax to be advertised, 5% on the electric rate to be advertised, and $47.79 on the water at 4,000 gallons to be advertised?
So moved.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second?
Motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor, please respond by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay. And again, those are the advertised rates. It does not mean that that's what those rates will be. I don't want there to be any confusion on that, because that's a big jump. And we'll have that discussion. I don't disagree. Ultimately, that's where we need to be, because we're losing potentially millions of dollars in outside revenue, and you can't do that and function as a modern locality. It's just how you get there and how quickly. And I don't disagree, too, either about the natural disaster piece. We need $1 million or so sitting there just in case we had a serious emergency. But I will point out a couple of things on this budget. And Todd and Trish and everybody, thank you for the hard work to get us here. We could have been looking at another 10 cents increase on the real estate tax. We could be talking a minimum of the $47.79 on water. We're not there, and that's a positive. The one thing that I really want to point out to everybody, this is the first budget that we have had in my time on council that is actually balanced with the revenues generated. What we didn't know during some of those budgets was that even though revenue projections were there, when you looked at Todd's charts, they were so far off the charts, we likely never would have made those. And so there was significant transfer from fund balances that we were not anticipating when we did that. This is a huge step for the city, because ultimately to get to sustainable, it's got to be the revenue generated in a year's time is what you're spending and saving, just like for anybody's budget. So kudos on this. And I have to also say thank you to everybody that worked on the budget last year, because that was a huge step forward to get us here when Mr. Meadows, Craig Meadows, as our interim manager, uncovered a lot of those structural deficiencies that were unknown at that time, and we made a lot of changes then. It actually made it harder to get to balance because we pulled everything back. And so what we've done in the last 2 years has just been tremendous to get us on track. I also wanted to point out one other thing. You know, one of the knocks that we've had with the city, before I ran for office, I know Jesse, when you ran, and for all the other council members, was that we had pushed so many investments down the road. Not just the last 2 or 3 years, but just like Todd points out, for 25 years at least, there are significant capital investments that we haven't been able to really target. We hit some things over the last 8 years. There were a number of roads and sidewalks and water line and sewer line improvements and things like that. So we tackled some of those things as we thought we could and did the best we could to address some of that infrastructure investment. But I think that's the real story that has been such a challenge, that things that could have happened over decades kind of got pushed, and we're experiencing some of the end of life of those over the next 5 or 10 years as we go. It's not that people recently turned a blind eye. We've had to manage from crisis for a few years because we weren't where we needed to be. But before that, we managed from convenience in a lot of ways because it was just easier not to deal with those things with higher rates, where we are now with the rates and everything along that line. I really do appreciate the honest discussion about that, because I think the most important thing for us moving forward as a community is to not say, absolutely we can be 40% cheaper than everybody else in the New River Valley, or absolutely we can do it for a rate that is half of what everybody else charges. We have to be upfront with everybody to say, this is what it costs if we're going to invest in infrastructure, if we're going to invest in people, if we're going to invest in our community and build a sustainable Radford for the next 20, 40, 60, 80, 100 years. And I think that's what we've done. So thank you, Todd. Thank you to Trish and the whole staff. Thank you to every single city employee, because I know all of you have worked so hard. That zero-based budgeting is huge, because you go back through and you look, what do we absolutely have to spend and why are we spending it? And we're thankful there. It makes me feel better that we've made this progress. We're not out of the woods. We're not where we want to be fully, but we've made such an investment on it over the last 24 months or so, the last 18 months, that we've moved a lot further down the road. I don't think anybody's ever happy when things increase, whether it's water rates, electric rates, tax rates, but you can see tonight, we've questioned every expense for the most part, and we'll look through this budget and there'll be some questions about expenses. We're about as cheap as we can possibly be in most of the areas. There's very little area where we could cut back more. And I'm pleased that we are finally investing in our employees after 3 years of not being able to do what we've needed to do, because that's an important part of our team. If we don't take care of our folks, how can they take care of us? I'm very, very happy and so thankful for our insurance folks to have gotten a good plan for the city so that it's not such a massive increase to the employees or to the city budget, and we're really fortunate on that. But to most folks out there in Radford, you know, this has been an extremely challenging time, and I think everybody has worked hard. I know all members of council have worked a lot of different ideas, 5 different directions. Everybody has said, what about this, what about that? How can we make this work, whether it's an additional revenue, an additional cut, an additional concept. And all of our employees have stepped up by saying, this is where I think we could do things differently, this is what we can improve. That's huge, and we're so appreciative of that. So it's been a big team effort. We do have one more new piece of business. I don't think we have anything else we have to do budget-wise for tonight, but we do have new business for the regular audit contract, correct?
No.
It's on the agenda.
Is it on the agenda?
Okay. Well, it was on my agenda, so I just wanted to make sure. Well, then we're done. We do have a meeting scheduled for Monday. We don't have a time listed for that. What time are we meeting on Monday? The 6th? Is it 6 p.m.? 6 p.m.? That was for discussion? Yeah, for discussion tonight.
But I think 6 o'clock was what we agreed upon for all the other special meetings for
Yep.
budget.
I just wanted to confirm. 6 o'clock Monday? 6 o'clock Monday? It's a tentative meeting. We definitely want to have it, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So we will then adjourn for tonight, and we will meet again at 6 p.m. on Monday. Unless anybody has anything else, we'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Do we have a second? Second. All in favor, say goodbye. Goodbye.